Hi, I'm going to do something a little bit different today for my channel. I have done reviews of products in the past, but this is a different kind of product. Let me give you some background before I introduce you to this new product. About 20 years ago, we invested in a product from a company called Nature Mill. It was a home composter, and the intention for that device was that you would put your food waste or other organic material in it, and after a few days it would process that and turn it into compost that was suitable for putting in your garden. Now, we're organic gardeners, and so finding a way to get the food waste from our kitchen and deploy it as a fertilizer to help our garden was something that was very attractive to us. Now, we live on 5 acres out in the country, and we've had a compost pile since we moved here in 1987. But the problem with that is if you don't stir your compost pile, things they don't break down. Certain organic waste requires oxygen in order to properly break down. So if you're not turning over your compost on a regular basis, the stuff that gets buried basically will stay in that state for a very long time. We have some compost in our compost pile that's been out there for 30 years, and it's still recognizable as what it was when it was put in there. Of course, it's broken down to a certain degree being out there for that long, but it's not really something I'd go out and put in my garden. I'd rather have something that is completely composted, and then I'm going to get that rich organic material and be able to put that in my flower beds or in our vegetable garden and be able to use it as fertilizer for our various plants that we have. So this device from Nature Mill, it was nice, but the problem was the engineering on it wasn't really designed to be very heavy duty. Most of the things that we put in it, we had to cut up before we put it in, or they wouldn't properly compost. There were tines inside of it that would spin and mix the compost in the Nature Mill. And things like banana peels would get wound around those, and then it would impede the progress of the composting. As much as we liked that device, the company that made it, which was also called Nature Mill, went out of business. And I think at least part of that was because we made a warranty claim on ours. They had to basically give us a whole new unit because ours failed in such a way that it couldn't be repaired. The design worked well in the lab, I'm sure. Over an extended period of time in use, it started to have problems and it broke. And we bought the initial unit, but then we got free parts on warranty, and then we got a whole new unit on warranty, and that isn't a good business model for any company. So flash forward to 2022, and there is a new device that fills that same role, only this device, I would argue, is what the Nature Mill people always wanted to make, and the execution on this is better, far better. This is the Lomi Home Composter from Pela.earth, P-E-L-A.earth. We've had it for about 2 weeks, and I've put it through its paces. I've composted a number of different types of food waste. Now that I'm familiar with this unit, I'm comfortable reviewing it and telling you about my experiences with it. It wasn't inexpensive, but considering what it does, I think it was a much better deal than the Generation 1 device we got from Nature's Mill 20 years ago. It's much heavier duty, and it feels like it will last a lot longer. Let me pull it apart and show you what it is like. It's relatively compact, but it has a lot of features that I really like. First of all, opening and closing it, the lid locks in place. And the nice thing about that is it basically seals it in. You can actually run this composter in your kitchen, and the smell of the composting food does not escape from the unit, and I'll show you why that is. First of all, as I said, it locks on. So the lid locks tight and it seals it fairly tightly. The first thing that helps with the odors is it has this filter that's built in. It's an activated charcoal filter. As you can see, it's filled with activated charcoal. And the unit as shipped, comes with 2 bags of this because there's 2 filters. There's this one that's inside, there's another one that's on the back of the unit. This absorbs the smell from the food that you're composting. And after a while, it will need to be replaced, but they sell replacement bags of this on their website. It just drops into place, and then that actually will circulate the air inside the composter through the filter and get rid of the smells. And then on the back of the unit, there's a second filter. It just pops out. There's these screws that hold it in place. I'm not going to take it all the way out to show you, but basically this is also filled with activated charcoal. It actually, oh, I take that back. The screws hold the top on the filter. The actual entire filter lifts right out. So you can change the charcoal, the activated charcoal, by using these wing nuts to loosen the top and pour in another bag of the activated charcoal. But between those 2 filters, it seems to take care of the odors quite well. They claimed that the nature milk could also be run indoors, but we always found that the smell was too strong, so we kept it out on our porch so that we could have it out of the rain, but yet outside of the house so that the smell wasn't quite so offensive. But these filters, the filter in back plus the filter inside, seems to really do a good job of keeping the odors under control. As far as operating the unit, there's a single button right in the front, and I'll show you how that works when I load it up with some food to start. It has this bucket inside that's easily removable, and this is where you put the food that you want to compost. There's a little left in the bucket from the last batch I did, but as you can see, there is this spinning, stirring mechanism on the bottom, and it is driven by this little sprocket that sets into the bottom of the unit, and in the bottom of the unit it has a motor that will spin this. As far as running the composter, it has 3 different modes controlled from this single button on the front. Depending on which mode you choose, it determines how long it takes for the composter to complete a cycle. If you plan to use the compost that comes out of the unit in your garden, they recommend that you use the slowest setting, and that one will take from 16 to 24 hours to run a full cycle. It's been my experience that it's almost like clockwork. 16 hours is what it takes, and at the end of those 16 hours, then you get your compost out of the unit, and it's ready to be taken right out into your garden at that point. It tends to have a fairly earthy dirt smell, but depending on what it is you're composting, it can have a little bit of a stronger aroma as well. My wife says that the smell is much more noticeable than it is to me. She notices it more than I do, but it does have some smell, but it's not bad. So let me show you how you load the unit up. First of all, you take the bucket out because you don't want to get a bunch of food on the top of the unit. As I said, our old device, you had to cut everything up. I found that with this, I can throw whole banana peels, coffee grounds in, and the paper filters, everything straight right in, and it will actually, when it stirs, it actually has a blade in the bottom that will cut that stuff up as well. And so it does a really good job of grinding, basically grinding up your organic material into small enough pieces that it can process it. So I'm just going to dump this in here. I've got some banana peels, I've got some coffee grounds. My wife peeled and cut up a pineapple yesterday. That I found that the rind of a pineapple is tough enough that I cut that up into smaller pieces because I thought that would be too hard for the unit to be able to manage on its own. There's a line on the inside of the bucket that tells you how full to fill it, and you're not supposed to go over that. And you're not supposed to pack it down in. I only put it down in enough to make sure that it's in there, but you don't want to overfill it. The other thing that I've noticed is with some foods that are particularly have a high water content, that the resultant compost can be very wet. And so for those types of foods, it's best to put in something to absorb some of that extra moisture. Now in the owner's manual that came with the device, they suggested yard waste, like dried leaves, maybe grass clippings or something like that, and that would help. I've actually found that what works really well for me are the same wood pellets that I use in my smokers when I work out with my beehives. I picked them up at the local big box store. It's just a mesquite barbecue smoker pellet. So all it is pure, basically sawdust pressed into small pieces. And I can just dump this in with the compost, and it will actually absorb the extra moisture and allow for a better finished product. I bought a whole bag of these, like a 20-pound bag of these, and it cost me just a few bucks. So it doesn't add a whole lot to the cost of running the unit, but I think it yields a much better result when you put some of this in there. When I do just like banana peels, coffee grounds, things like that, I don't need to add this. It's just things like this pineapple has a lot of moisture in it, and so for the pineapple it's necessary. So I just dump a little bit of that on top. At this point, all of our organic matter is in place, and we're ready to put the bucket back in the unit and start it running. Again, you want to make sure when you put the top on, you lock it in place. The unit will not run if it's not locked in place. It has these little indicators to show you whether or not it is locked in place. Once it's locked in place, then you're ready to start the unit. It just plugs into a standard outlet, nothing special required. You could set it up on your counter, run it on your counter if you want. I just have a nice spot on the floor in my kitchen where it fits nicely, and that's where I run it. So once you have the unit closed up and plugged in, you'll notice that when you have it properly closed, if you don't have the lid on tight, it indicates that by having the LEDs red. But then once you spin it and get it closed and locked, then it turns green. The default setting is this selection in the middle, the default mode, and that's going to be the fastest mode. So it'll finish most quickly, but it heats up the compost enough that it'll actually break down the organic matter, so it doesn't make for as good of a fertilizer. So what I do is I switch it over to this mode over here, which is the one that takes the longest, and that's the one that gives you the best quality fertilizer. When you push the button in, it will beep, and then it'll beep a second time when it changes the mode, so you can watch how that works. Okay, so that's on the middle mode, and I'm going to press it one more time, and now it's on the mode that I want. And now that I have that mode selected, all I have to do is press the button, and the unit starts its job. So you can probably hear it. It makes some noise. It's not terrible. I would say it doesn't make as much noise as our dishwasher, for example, but it does make some noise. And the noise kind of cycles on and off because it'll stir for a while, and then it'll just sit, and then it'll stir for a while, and then it'll just sit. So the amount of noise that it makes varies throughout the cycle. So this is an example of a batch that completed yesterday. When it went into the unit, it looked very much like what I just loaded in for this batch. It had banana peels, coffee grounds, some tomato cores, caps from strawberries, and cut up pineapple rind. And because it had the pineapple in it, I threw some of those wood pellets in it. And so as you can see, we now have this is the finished product. And it's very fine, and the recommendation in the owner's manual is if you're going to mix it in with your potted plants, you want about a 10-to-1 ratio of potting soil to the compost. You don't want to put too much of the compost in, or it will actually damage the plants and cause them to not grow properly. Some of the first compost that I made with my Lomi got mixed into some potting soil, and my tomato plants that I've started are benefiting from the compost that came out of our kitchen less than a week ago. I just transplanted these I started them in much smaller pots, and I moved them into these larger peat pots. And when I did as they suggested in the owner's manual, and I did a 10-to-1 mix of the potting soil to the compost material. And as you can see, my tomato plants are enjoying the nutrition that I gave them. So there you have it. That's my review of the Lomi Home Composter after a couple weeks of ownership. Thus far, my impressions have been very positive. I think this is, as I said earlier, a very well-designed unit, and it seems to work exactly the way you'd want it to. If you're an organic gardener like I am, and you'd like to take your food waste from your kitchen and redeploy it into your garden, I think this would be an excellent new appliance for you to add to your kitchen.